So thank you, Emma. So today we have Peter Howe from the University of Maine, and sorry for it'll be a little bit smaller because Peter's computer wasn't, or I think the problem is our cable wasn't working very well with Peter's computer, so it's running off of mine. But today we have Peter Howe here from the University of Maine, new PhD student, working in Dan Hayes's lab, and also one of our Acadia Science Fellows for this year. And this is the work that he's working on for that fellowship. Well, at least the Acadia portion of this work. I don't actually know whether you'll be talking about the whole state or just the Acadia portion.
Do some of both.
Okay, great. So it's really exciting, and I think this project will actually set the stage for a bunch of future research so it'll be exciting on its own, but it'll also provide a foundation for kind of more work to come for us. But I will hand it over to you, Peter. Thanks for coming out.
Awesome. Yeah, got to meet a few of you guys, but maybe I can hear more about who you are and what you all do afterwards. But feel free to, hope this feels like we're going for show and tell a little bit. If folks haven't looked through a stereoscope before, I have it set up so you can see this is the old school photogrammetry, and I'm going to be talking about kind of modern photogrammetry, but working with the same stuff. So I'm talking about stitching together the past, and it's about bringing this really tremendous historical record of historical era imagery forward using modern photogrammetry techniques. This is a mosaic of Down East Maine, 1966. You're gonna head there now. This is Maine, Marsh Island here. We're gonna zoom down to Machias or to Whitneyville. This is a mosaic of 250. You know what? I'm hearing a little feedback on my computer.
Oh, if you turn off your
sorry about that.
Your speaker.
There we go. There you go. That should be great. So this is that mosaic of 250 photos down East Maine, and just wanted to pause here and appreciate, it's a little smaller there, but the detail of these photographs is amazing. You can see, individual tree shadows. You can see these log booms that they would use for the log drives to send logs downriver, down on the Machias. And then zooming out, we start to get this kind of larger picture of really dramatic landscape change across time. So when the dam was removed, that whole valley, that was previously flooded is gone, and sort of, the ecology of that place is in pretty dramatic transition. And it's the kind of thing that if you were to walk out there by the river, it might actually be hard to know what was going on or what had happened there. So it's sort of one example of kind of this historical record and what we can learn. And then I'm thinking about, what does it look like if we can scale that level of detail, scale that across the landscape, across the northern forest. And that's really what we can do with this amazing archive of historical imagery that's out there. I wanted to start here though, why stop to study the past when we have plenty of pressing things, current and future things to be thinking about. I'm just thinking about, the past, present, and future forest as a continuum. And that if we can't predict the future, but if we want to try to learn some things about the present and future forest, we have to be students of the past. And this notion of, this is what historical ecology is all about, and about sort of how intertwined human histories and ecological histories are, and that we really can't be studying those in isolation. And that's really what this work is all about. I really like this schematic on the right. You'll see that of that triad at the center, there's ecological memory. And I really like that kind of centering of that, because for me, what got me into this work was, there's so many cool research questions to ask about this work, but for me, it was really like the awe that I feel kind of looking back in time through these photographs and a photo like that, and so trying to kind of carry that in the work too, because I think that reaches people in a really strong way, it's just as important as kind of the research questions.
Are those logs?
Yeah, so that's a log drive down the Penobscot River. Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Not nice.
Yeah, and I live right on the Penobscot River, so. Oh no. Okay, so what do we know about the past? We know that it's complicated. This is like I had fun making this kind of incomplete schematic of some of the many, drivers of forest change across time. And so we have these long-term processes, we have these legacy effects, and we have these point events that are all shaping the forest today. And what does that tell us about the present forest? I really like this quote, Emily Russell Southgate. While physiology and population dynamics determine what species can grow somewhere, the history of a site and region play a major role in what actually does grow there. So this notion of site history being really important to shaping that current forest. And what does that tell us about the future forest? Maybe folks know Matthew Duvenek. I think he was a prior fellow.
Yeah.
And in one of his papers, he was great, quote, despite novel agents of global change, like climate change, recovery dynamics continue to be the dominant process driving forest change. And so climate change, right, is just one of many of those drivers of change, and that's not to diminish the seriousness of it or the importance of studying it, but that if we are to study and understand climate impacts in the forest, we have to have a really strong handle on all of these other forces at work and how those are shaping the forest. And then down below here, this is kind of, what do we have to look into the past? And the remote sensing record being sort of just one of those pieces. And so we have like modern digital aerial imagery, which is amazing, right? It's super high res. It's kind of everywhere now, but it only goes back to say the early 2000s. And then we have satellite imagery, which is also amazing, and that goes further back to the 70s or 80s, but that gets pretty quickly, it gets pretty coarse, like 30-meter resolution or 60-meter resolution. And then we have these black and white photos, which are black and white, and so they're, they are limited in that sense in their film, but they go all the way back to the 1930s, and they were sort of, they came out of the World Wars. The military was using them in the World Wars, and then this was adapted for civilian use, for forest management, tax assessment, all sorts of stuff. And while they're spectrally limited, it's this huge leap back in time that we can look. And that's really what we have here at UMaine, this incredible collection that UMaine was given in 2019 by the Sewell Company, which was a longtime surveying and engineering company. They're still around, but they moved out of their Old Town office just up the road from me. And so they donated, they didn't know what to do with these 3,000 rolls of film. I brought just a canister there that's about, we don't even know, it's about 700,000 to 1 million photographs, that a fraction of which have been digitized. And they're in a climate controlled warehouse, and they cover all of Maine many times over. This map on the right is it shows sort of an inventory of by town, how many surveys there are, and you can see that most of Maine, there are at least a dozen surveys across time from the 1940s onwards. So for time change analysis, looking across time, this is really cool and exciting.
How many are there here?
So I know of Acadia, there are like 117 surveys that touch different portions of the national park. I have a fun inventory sheet here that folks can look at. And then I'll show you later, kind of, I've been looking for, what are the most comprehensive ones we have, and I'll show you some of those. This is Brad Washburn down here. He was kind of an early innovator. And so these guys, they would hang out of airplanes with these giant frame cameras. They would tie themselves in and then take these photos in the air. And they'd be these, like, this is a contact print, but th'ey'd be like these, 9x9 inch large format film photos.
They're not probably past our safety stuff.
Yeah.
He was a mountaineer.
He was, yes, he was a bold fellow. Yeah, so then photogrammetry, maybe some folks have done some photogrammetry work in the past. I have the old school photogrammetry set up right over here. It sounds more complicated than it is. It's really just a method for combining multiple images that have of common objects. And it's basically what our eyeballs do, right? Where they're taking from two slightly different positions, they're picking up two different images and then combining them into a composite image. And if we have overlap between photographs, we can do the same thing, stitching them together into these mosaics. Like that one of the Allagash River there, that was flown right when it turned into a wilderness waterway. And so not only can we do this by stitching images together, but we're also getting depth too, right? Because our, the two images is what, from slightly different angles, is what gives our eyes depth. And that's what you'll see if you stare into the stereoscope there. This is kind of just an overview of kind of my approach to the work. The first and last are kind of less traditional research objectives, but are really essential. All of them are kind of essential to this project. The first being, like, how do we facilitate digitization of this huge collection to be able to do any of this kind of analysis? And then a lot of my work personally is really more methods based, like developing kind of best practices for photogrammetry processing of historical photos, which there hasn't been a lot done and shared in that realm at this point. So I'm trying to work on that and then share that as best I can. And then there's the whole landscape analysis piece, which there are so many different directions to go in there, and I'll share more about that. And then finally, also, like, really important to this is how do we make this stuff all accessible and user friendly? Especially because this collection is a public resource, living at the university. And it sounds like some of you know about the 1944 collection, which I just recently learned about. So these are historical photos from a 1944 aerial survey of the coast, and this is Schoodic Point there. It's, really interesting.
Looks a little different.
Yeah, looks a little bit.
The Navy base is definitely different.
Yeah. So kind of walking through those 4 different pieces of what I do. The first being the whole digitization piece. That's where I've spent most of my time lately, and kind of in this first year, it's like, how do we get this stuff digitized? That includes these up in the upper left those are flight index maps, and that's what, I'll use to figure out where the photographs are actually on the landscape for an area of interest. And then once I know what photos to look for, then I can go, grab the canister and then bring them to this scanner. And that scanner that's a photogrammetry scanner, and it's pretty specialized. They don't make them anymore. And that one recently arrived on a cargo ship from China. It was the only one in the world that I could find for sale. And so miraculously it arrived a few months ago in great shape, and we've gotten it set up. And one of the key things about this scanner is that it has an automated film unit to it, so that it can advance the roll of film on its own. So you don't have to sit there manually scanning each photo. So that's huge for kind of large scale
So are
digitization.
you scanning negatives then? Is that
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Exactly, yep, so that's a roll of all negatives. But you can scan contact prints on it too. And the film, another piece of that scanner is that it's, you know, these are super high resolution photos, they're like 2100 dots per inch. Which is way finer than the naked eye can see, we can see about 300 dpi when we look at a photograph. But the film actually captures, this polyester film captures 2100 dpi. So the detail of these photos is just incredible. So we want to capture all that. Oh, and it runs on Microsoft Windows XP too, which is fun. That's, yeah. That.
This is an historic project.
Yeah, this is like,
The last copy of that for sale.
oh my god, yeah, no, that's been like a wild goose chase, like just getting a computer that can actually handle Windows
Yeah.
XP. But, yeah, so we're spanning all the technological eras in this project. So this is kind of moving into the photogrammetry software, it's called Metashape, what I use. But basically this first step, what this software can do is it's finding those common objects or common tie points between photographs. So that's what you're seeing, this is like a point cloud of basically common points between photos that it finds, and that is what allows the software to then align these photos in space together. And then from there, kind of the magic of this work where I spend a lot of my time is the georeferencing bit. Like, how do we get these photos to map onto the modern landscape and modern imagery in a spatially accurate way? So that requires finding points on the landscape that you know haven't moved across time, which can be challenging depending on where you are. So I spend a lot of time. I'm yet to discover, you know, I don't think Chat GPT or AI can do this yet. This is all manual. Basically finding points on the landscape that I know haven't moved, and those coordinates help tie the historical photos to modern imagery. Lots of boulders, barns, bridges.
Do
That
you
kind
do
of
that
thing.
on every photo?
Yeah, ideally, depending on the size and the strength of the overlap. Not necessarily every single photo, but the more the better often. And that's where a lot of my work is, like the methods piece is figuring out how much do we to get a spatially accurate mosaic built kind of at that scale, at like say a countywide scale. How many georeference points do you need?
And how do you automate that? Don't you want to?
Yeah, how do you automate
At
that?
some point.
Yeah, to be seen. That bit. And then kind of as I touched on, you know, a piece of this process is actually we're getting a three-dimensional model of the historical landscape, which is also really wild that, you know, we're getting a three-dimensional reconstruction of the historical landscape that's also useful for correcting for photo distortion. Because in every photo there's photo distortion, and to stitch them together we need to correct for that. So this model, it can sort of stretch the imagery across that three-dimensional model to correct, and then we get this orthomosaic, which can be really high resolution. They're often about like 40 centimeter resolution, and the spatial accuracy is often under a meter. So that's really exciting for spatial analysis that we can
For
do.
like the 40 photos from the 40s?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. If our georeference points are good. Yeah, so then from there, we can start to think about, you know, what kind of land change analysis work we can do. This is just kind of a rough schematic of, you know, showing that, you know, we do modern land cover classification. And we can do this with historical imagery too. It's more limited because we're working with one band being black and white, one light band versus, you know, 3 or 4 or many hyperspectral imagery. But we can still capture in these photos, you know, broader land cover types and forest types. That can be really useful, and so, you know, we can do this at scale. That's sort of a statewide example of land cover change.
So,
Yeah.
you take the 44 imagery that we've been talking about as an example.
Yeah,
You look at the 9x9s,
yeah,
they're not that crisp. They're
Yeah.
okay. Are you gonna be able to make those pop?
so,
Is that, because you're scanning the negative?
so I. Currently with the 44 imagery, I only have, you know, the digital copies that you all have here.
Oh,
Which probably aren't quite as good as the full res original film.
right.
And I've tried to get in touch with the National Archives. With NOAA, it's basically that film is in purgatory because NOAA gave it to the National Archives. But the National Archives is so backed up, they don't have it available. So it's currently in purgatory. But it's
Take
still,
another set of
Yeah.
imagery,
Yeah.
whatever, where you have access. When you have access to the negative, you're scanning it at a much higher resolution
right, than this,
than this.
Correct.
And so things are really gonna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I'll show you, I've got some examples, we can zoom in. Yeah, and then with the land change analysis piece, this is one example, this is cool work that Valerie Pasquarella has done. Has anyone ever seen this before? It's, so she worked with satellite imagery, basically creating for every year, a disturbance map of, you know, this is northern Maine, so this is basically a harvest map. Of where places were logged year to year, going all the way back to 86. And I'm really excited for this imagery to be able to kind of add another 40 years onto that, hopefully, where, you know, you could go on and you could look year to year. That sort of disturbance history. And then the 3-dimensional bit, it doesn't show up super well there, but as we saw from these orthomosaics, this is the 1956 mosaic I put together of the island. And in that process, we got this 3-dimensional model. This is looking from the air towards Cadillac. And what we can do with this model is we can use that as kind of a proxy for canopy height. And this is that model from 56, and you can see this whole area that we know was burned. You know, there's hardly any canopy height. And then you can see the places that didn't burn, where a tree canopy was intact. And then comparing this, especially in a place like Acadia, where we know there haven't been harvests across time, we can do this canopy height change, which is really cool to look at forest regeneration. And you can see, you know, these valleys where there's been a lot more regeneration, and then the summits where there hasn't been. And we can kind of validate this by looking at places, again, like places that we know haven't changed in elevation, like say Cadillac Summit Road. We know that probably hasn't changed. And if we see that that's pretty accurate, then we can feel pretty good about the rest of this height data.
Were all of these historical photos taken during leaf on period?
It really depends.
Okay.
Some people really wanted the surveys during leaf off, you know, to look at hardwood versus softwood. And then a lot of folks wanted them leaf on. So it depends, which is cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, some of both in the archive. Yeah, and then this last bit is just kind of the step 4 of, you know, how do we make this stuff accessible and interactive online? So this is kind of like a prototype online map that I've been adding mosaics that I've been working on thus far. That anyone can go on and zoom in and explore the imagery.
Karen sent us a link to that. Did you send it to Karen?
Oh, yeah, I sent, yeah, and I'll share
Send us a
that.
link to it.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, no, I'm excited to share that. So this is that 44 imagery again. This is the summit of Cadillac Mountain. And yeah, thinking more about, what can we look at in Acadia here. This is kind of what I've found looking through all the different available collections from different archives and looking for what are the most comprehensive photo surveys that we could work with. And you see that 1944 set, the military flew. And then that 1956 set that I've worked on so far. And then I've also done the 1966 orthomosaic. Is up and online. But there's other cool ones like this 1985 set from the Park Service hired Sewell in 1985 to fly the whole park. And the resolution is just incredible. It's 14 centimeters. So this is like a super duper detailed imagery of the whole park. So I'm really excited to get that stitched together. The work with that.
What
So
is the
what's
land?
quality like of the Sewell collection? I mean, is it all just top shelf, or is there some, how would you describe it?
Yeah, good question. It's pretty darn good because, it's the original film and they would, they'd often give their clients the contact prints that people would then draw on. So there's less scribbling on the film. And because they were the originals, people weren't using them as much after they were taken. So they're in pretty good shape and they're also in a climate controlled warehouse. And so overall, they're in great shape.
So they've been
Yeah.
climate controlled the whole time? I can imagine the early years of Sewell, it probably
I
wasn't.
couldn't
but-
say what
Yeah.
Sewell,
Anyway, they're pretty good.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the exciting things about this imagery is, so this is all polyester from the 1940s onwards. But before that, they were using nitrate film, and nitrate film, if it's not climate controlled, explodes. So there's a concern in many places that, there's some nitrate film, slipped in somewhere and it can just combust. So this stuff's safe. That container's
Back in the
empty.
fridge.
This is great, Camilla's here, and you've talked with folks about your research, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah. This is just kind of like a little case study, so you guys probably know, there's been a lot of very cool coastal spruce research. Past and present happening, including that Camilla's done, and on the left, that map, that's a map of Ron Davis's work in the 60s of mapping coastal spruce. And the very cool thing that Camilla did was going and re-inventorying these forest plots that he did across the island. And these transects you can see down here that he did. And so, so Camilla went and redid these plots, and other folks at UMaine are also doing a bunch of research plots across coastal Maine, looking at coastal spruce. And this imagery is just, it's really cool and interesting to use this as kind of, to inform the disturbance history of, what's happened. From since the 60s when Ron Davis did his plots, and then, what Camilla is seeing today. And this is, I think, Otter Point is the place, right, where there was that wind disturbance. And this is, sort of a great example of, through the imagery, being able to see these disturbance events that help explain, regeneration that maybe looked quite different otherwise. Yeah, so that's kind of my Acadia focused work. I do have, plenty of exciting personal research directions to explore, but I think really like the most useful thing that I can do is to make all of this imagery and this data accessible to you all and to others, other folks who are, experts in their fields or can use this. So I'm thinking about how to compile all this stuff, these other historical maps, these orthomosaics, at least kind of one per decade to present day, and then classifying forest cover. Another cool thing about this historical data we have, like Ron Davis's plots, is that we can actually use that historical data to train and validate our models of forest cover classification. So looking forward to doing that, and then some of those visualizations that I was talking about. We'll bop onto the internet here, and this is just like a very simple, crude kind of ARC online map, but I think starts to give you a sense for kind of the power of like starting to overlay this data, and got the park boundary in there, and then this is that fire perimeter boundary in red. And then what I have shown here is the 1956 orthomosaic. But beneath that, we have 1966, so we can, you know, move back and forth in time. Let's just go to park headquarters. Here we are. So that's 1966, and that's pretty darn sharp, right? You can see individual cars. And then we also can be working in this canopy height change data. Looking at canopy height change across the whole park. And then we also can be looking at these historical maps. This is a historical survey from 1953 of vegetation after the fire. That's really cool. This guy Kushler did. And this again, you know, is really useful for classifying historical forest cover. So having this all together is really cool. And then just while I'm here, this is kind of an example of what that can look like at a broader scale. You know, if we can have this data for a much larger area all in one place where folks can use it and explore it. So I'm excited to keep working towards that.
So did you say that's available now on the?
Yeah, this is a link. I'll send you the link. Yep. Yep. I could actually drop that. Well, if I could figure out how to do that, I could drop that in the chat. It'd be fun.
I'd like to see the summit of Cadillac Mountain.
Yeah,
Over
absolutely.
Yeah.
To see what kind of impacts there were pre and post fire and that
Absolutely.
sort of thing.
Could you detect like vegetation changes at the summit?
Well, that's already been done to a degree, by Min Cook Kim, I think.
Yeah.
But to take it even further back.
Yeah, going further back.
Would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Going back pre-fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the post-fire.
I mean,
Yeah.
the Army would have had a lot of impact up there in the forties too, but, you know, even so, the public was excluded
Huh.
during the war.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
So,
Okay. I need to read up on that.
well, you'll have to.
Or just
go to
talk
the
to you.
National Archives, which is 75%, you know, defense stuff.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Huh.
How many years have they excluded the public?
I think from, I think it started sometime in 42, exact date, I can't remember, but it would have been pretty soon after the war started, I think.
Huh.
Because they already had their eyes on Cadillac, and even before the war started, there was Army here. Preparing, because they knew it was a good site, for observational purposes, and that's where there was a radar installation up there.
Okay.
It was all top secret sort of thing back then, but that's what it was.
Huh. Very cool.
Yeah, Charlie, you didn't even know all this stuff.
Okay.
Just read the administrative history report. The Cliff Notes.
Hold your horses.
Well, we gotta get that published.
Yeah.
Let me know what I think. I'll give you pictures.
Right.
I'll send you pretty pictures. Yeah, so just kind of sort of wrapping up here is so this kind of Acadia focused work is like one of a number of directions I'm really excited to be taking this work. kind of what got me into this work was actually mapping tree line shift and looking at tree line shift in the White Mountains. I'm excited to be looking more at Katahdin. And then also there's some cool work happening around old growth forest mapping across Maine. This group Our Planet Common is doing, using LiDAR metrics, and hopefully this data can be used to kind of validate some of that. And then working with foresters and other land managers, like folks at AMC and Penobscot Nation, who are, they're really interested in understanding the harvest histories of their lands, to better inform kind of long-term forest management, sustainable forest management. So I'm excited to be, working with all those folks, but there's so many other directions to take this stuff. I had a few down there, biomass modeling, spruce budworm, outbreak extents, sea level rise, beaver reclamation. So, interested to hear what you all come up with as well. But there's Otter Point, and just some of the kind of broader impacts of this work, hopefully, is that I guess I've been one of the more foolish people to try to do this at this scale at this point. So I'm excited in that regard to share it and have this be a novel look at long-term landscape scale change.
When does the earliest when's the earliest photos that you have access to?
So in the Sewell collection, it's 1946. But there are some archives that go back to like the late 30s, like 39 is kind of the earliest that I've seen often. Post World War I. And hopefully making this kind of a lasting public resource for land managers, researchers, educators, the general public.
Note there's only one camping loop at Blackwood.
I noticed that.
Yeah, okay, that's
Like
so,
really-
it's so well defined.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's amazing how well defined that is.
yeah, really.
And there's some furways on Mount Katahdin. Anyone knows about furways?
Yeah, oh, man,
That's another cool,
for a minute I thought they were actual waves on the,
Right.
like of water.
yeah, so
Like
this
river
is
or
on the
something.
west slope of Katahdin, this
That's awesome.
place called the Klondike, this giant mountain wetland. And it's one of the best examples in the world of furways, and that's kind of this mysterious ecological phenomenon, these waves of dying spruce across time. So this is a cool long range look at, how are they actually moving?
Right.
So, like, are you saying when,
They
like,
move,
Yeah, you can
Really
see them
exist.
move it, yeah,
they're only found in about 3 places in the world.
that's right.
I read an article in Natural History about
I
that.
think the Northeast, Alaska and Japan,
Japan,
Yep.
yeah.
yep. So highly recommend going and looking at the furways. Yeah,
That's so cool.
but that's what I got.
Yeah, well, thank you. We've got time for questions, folks.
Yeah, one quick question, thinking of other even aged forests, and maybe it doesn't go back far enough, but does your extent include outer islands or unbridged islands across the coast as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
though, it's just kind of thinking, I mean, it might be too much of a time lapse since sheep fever or any of those, like, just kind of, it'd be kind of curious to look.
Oh, no, I've totally seen some sheep fever out.
You have seen some
Yeah,
sheep fevering?
Some bear,
Okay,
some bear and
Barren, yeah, and then the progress towards
Yeah,
a new canopy.
yeah, so that
Whatever
44
point.
set covers like, I think from kind of Blue Hill, or at least here, all the way down east towards Machias. And then a lot of these other sets as well, like this 1966 set, that covers all of, Waldo County. That's a countywide data set, so I can click through here.
Idaho,
yeah.
Mm.
Isn't Iowa
not county,
No,
it's one thing, yeah.
Oh, sorry, did I say Waldo? I meant Hancock. But yeah, so Idaho is down here.
Yeah.
And I have to admit to you, the Idaho, because it's the furthest out, I need to go back and put some more ground control points in, because it's a little off. And you can see, this is a good example I can show you, this is what happens if the ground control points aren't good enough. It's off, you know, by 20 or so meters. But
Hard removed.
that's fixable.
But
But
I think pier wasn't built till 1989.
it's there,
Anything before then, that wouldn't serve your purposes.
okay,
Right, it's hard because of the, you know,
Something
the
has-
coast depends upon the tide,
Good
Mhm.
shift.
you know.
Yeah.
where you, the boulders, if you're
Yeah.
finding specific boulders that are above the tide line.
yeah,
Wow.
so yeah, there's plenty of, this is a good example,
Oh,
that looks
yeah.
like a pretty barren
Mhm.
island.
Are those dots individual sheep? I'm just-
Right.
Yeah, so, yeah,
That's awesome.
So so this is probably more than a PhD project, right? So you're like, this is gonna be a long-term project to like do the whole region? Or
Yeah.
are you thinking that, like, what parts are you focused on? So you're focused on those handful of projects that you kind of, for digitizing data, the images that are gonna help you address those specific questions first?
yeah. I'd say, yeah, it is, I'm trying to, so I'm collaborating with, you know, the UMaine Special Collections is the group that actually technically manages this collection. And so I'm really trying to work with them as much as I can for this to be, you know, have this be an ongoing project process. They already get tons of requests for, you know, hey, what does my house look like in 1956?
Oh, yeah.
And it's a public resource and they're a public university, and so, you know, they want to be able to, and also, you know, should be able to share that, but it's currently in a place where it's a lot of work to be able to share it, because it's not digitized.
Mhm.
So hopefully, yeah, the digitization will be a many years process, for sure.
Folks online can feel free to either stick your questions in the chat or feel free to, you know, unmute yourself and kind of pop in. Yeah, other questions in the room?
So, the images that were digitized for here, was that part of Mandy Little's work? Is that, because she looked at beaver activity in wetlands going back to the 44 set, I think, but she was looking at the contact prints, I think, and that's
Cool.
what I think I feel like that's what she did.
That was the original digitization here.
Yeah, it was
Was-
her.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Karen's on,
With
but I think
Karen,
she
yeah.
can
Okay.
say that, but I'm pretty sure she was digitizing the images.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, so like having like the super high res version of that to actually look at wetland change, cause I tried to look at those scanned ones to look at like the changes in vegetation, like woody versus, and you can like tell forested a little bit, but it's so blurry
Yeah,
that it's not, but this like 14 centimeter resolution, I'm like,
yeah,
that's crazy,
it is crazy.
yeah.
To see someone waving, yeah,
I mean, almost like,
But that's gotta get pursued through the National Archives for the 44.
for the original film, yes. So what I have is, you know, some of the original digitals they're pretty darn good, but yeah, I'll keep on it to try to get
You
the.
probably know somebody by now.
No. The Marine would have to
Yeah,
put in a request. of
An
some
official
kind,
request.
which Would probably be a good thing to do, maybe
Hmm.
coming internally
yeah.
might make it.
There was, the 14 center, that was the 1985.
That was the
that
1985.
Park Service contracted, so like,
Yeah,
it's kind of like, do we already have somehow in our collections for that? Because it was an NPS.
you
We
may
have prints,
Okay.
but we don't have the negatives. If Peter's got the negatives, they're gonna be better.
Yeah. Gotcha.
When was it, the Beaver Peak was 79, is that right?
For population.
During the population, there was like a lot of change that happened around there, I think, and then like they started declining and then there was response, so that would be a nice time period of really high res. Wasn't there like a crazy deer peak too in the 70s? I think it was
60s, I
60s,
think.
yeah,
Well, I mean,
That'd be hard to
sharpshooting them, right, or
see.
somebody.
Yeah, well, it's like
Mhm.
extreme. ones.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just one, yeah, you can see that in some of the open areas.
Yeah.
It's,
Are you working with anybody to like use these in a communication context? Or is it mostly landscape change, like the research context? And the communication will come later.
Yeah, I'm hoping to and excited to, I know there's some folks like through Scudic, that I've met or connected with, and definitely wanna talk with Catherine more about that, about other folks I can connect with. As I have more of this stuff digitized and together,
Mhm.
you know, what formats can we get this in online, or how can this be best shared?
Yeah.
So any ideas that you all ever have, like, please let me know, cause, yeah, I'd love to support
I
that.
believe it just telling stories, like I think, like we've already, like, they've already done a bunch of analysis on like the impacts of beaver, right? But you, if you just visualize, like have that visual,
Mhm.
like here's decade by decade, like. Telling that story and highlighting things could enhance, yeah, the storytelling.
Fire 47.
Yeah, right, recover from
Which we
47.
tell them over different
And even
ways.
if there are pockets within that burn that were still forest.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like identifying the remnants,
Totally.
that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Catherine says that you're gonna be on the podcast.
Oh,
So
great,
there's one.
The seas to tree, on the seas to
Okay.
trees.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, or Catherine, do you wanna mention a little bit about the podcast for those that haven't listened to it?
Sure. Sea to Trees is the Acadia National Park's inaugural podcast in partnership with Scudic Institute and produced by our Gero Science Communication Fellow, which this year is Trevor Grandin. And Trevor and I had an awesome visit up to the University of Maine with Peter. And we got to see the canisters and the different scanning methods, and it was just awesome. And it's such a great story, and as you can hear from people's questions, there's just so much that this information can be helpful for. So I've already been using the Historical Forest Atlas for stories about the fire and pitch pine spread and logging history and all of those questions. I think when you combine it with other forms of history, it's especially powerful.
Other questions that folks have?
Like, I can't wait to start looking at the
I
photos.
know, yeah.
So, Soren, do you wanna unmute your, oh, actually, hold on, after, in just a second, Soren, we'll get to your question, but Kate.
I was just saying my productivity is gonna dip a little bit, thanks to you. So,
Glad I can support that.
Hopefully it'll recover, like,
Yeah,
after
right.
a bunch of new project ideas.
Yeah.
The knowledge will come around like
Yeah.
many years later, you
Yeah.
know, it's gonna come in handy.
Alright, Soren, do you wanna unmute yourself and ask a question?
Sure. I was just curious if there was a list of the undigitized surveys and ideally their extents, like online, just to know what's down the pike or what the future holds.
Yeah, good question. So actually, most of what's on that list right there on the screen is undigitized. So this 1979, this 1985, this 2005. Any of the ones that are from the Sewell collection are undigitized. This 44 one, you know, is digitized, what we have of it. This 55 one is not yet digitized, this 56 and 66 is. And then, you know, I'm only showing these collections that are mostly complete, but down here, what did I write? Yeah, so there are 117 surveys that cover different pieces of the park. You know, smaller surveys that were done that are all undigitized, so there's way more records of certain areas available.
Sorry, is that spreadsheet
Right.
posted on the collection
No.
website? Okay,
It's not, and yeah, to better answer your question, you know, if folks have questions about specific areas. In the inventory list, it only gets as granular as township, you know, town by town. But I can share with folks, you know, what records do we have for a given town? And then I can look at the index maps and figure out, you know, which exact area those surveys might have covered.
Great. So we can have you come back in like a year and see an update.
That'd be fun,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I can see already, like, you heard mentioned questions about like the summits in particular, and so we
Yeah.
could focus that even more to like the towns amount. That are in Bar Harbor, and then more specifically, a few collection of summits that we're interested in where. Both maybe tree line has done shifting,
Yeah.
but other, you know, whatever else comes with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have big project, like, I think there would be a lot of interest in Bass River Marsh too, and Great Meadow area, but
If we
and Otter
could see
Creek.
vegetation change in Great Meadow, like, if we can see if there were like,
Since the 30s or well, 40s, I mean,
right, like.
that's a lot.
Like, if all that was shifting.
Yeah.
Right, and you could compare it to the kind of the same time in Gilmore Meadow or other wetlands, just see how Great Meadow is doing differently than these other locations.
And there's probably like a T in the 9th hole of Tebow or something that's been there. since the 1800s, that could be a reference point. It's not a boulder, but like, you know, some of those, that
Well,
landscape.
the Loop Road has been there for a long time,
Loop
right?
Road.
I mean.
Yeah.
No,
there
he's
is
right.
a
It's
lot
one
of
of the-
these photos.
Photo.
It's like, oh yeah, golf course is still there,
Still there.
The
Yeah,
mode.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same hole, like
Elevation.
flag and hole
yeah,
placement. That shifts.
Maybe there's,
I'm not a
maybe
golf
one of the
course.
photos captures tag
Yeah.
on the golf course
that was Bass River Marsh, Great Meadow,
and
and
the summits. I mean,
And Gilmore Meadow was.
and
Gilmore
Gilmore,
Meadow.
Gilmore is a comparison for Great Meadow. Yeah, I mean, Otter Creek is another spot, that we'd be interested in. Knowing that the photos are gonna, a lot of the interest there is in what's going on in the marine area, and depending upon what the tides are, will mess with what the images are.
If there were photos prior to Causeway, but there aren't, that's why I asked
Yeah.
5 years.
Yeah,
That's exactly what I was thinking about.
and we could look at the landscape around the
What
causeway.
was Pathway put in?
36, 39,
Completed.
right? There's a bridge there before.
739 is the earliest photo. I wonder
Several.
if
Yeah.
I wonder if the bridge is done by then or not.
Mm.
39 is the earliest year.
The report that I said that was completed I saw it was completed in 39.
Yeah, depending on the timing of the photos.
Right,
Yeah.
You could have a picture before it
yeah,
actually was completed. All of the construction probably presumably would be underway, already messing it up, but. Anyway,
Yeah. But it'd be, anyhow, yeah.
I mean, there's an
a lot-
interesting, like, whole thing of this too, like, just from a development standpoint, the park's history and kind of looking spatially at like development in the park and what's occurred and. Aside from the ecology of it all.
and around the pond, development around the
That's a good
pond,
point.
yeah.
But you could, if you have that kind of resolution, you could go back to some of the trail, like, just see the widening impact of
That's
Yeah.
stuff. You're
You can
just
see
like,
trail corridors for sure, and the
Just-
White Mountains that I've worked with.
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean,
See
yeah,
Little Moose Island, I think it'd be fun to look at that, Becca, to see what kind of spider web trails was out there before. You know, the 80s anyway, if any. Yeah.
Do you ever notice if some are taken at low tide? Like, is it ever obvious to you that, like, if we could identify ones taken at low tide, that
Yeah,
could be useful too?
yeah, and some of them, it would be really helpful to know the exact time they were taken, and they did start, it seems like at some point in the 60s or 70s. Some surveys will have, they had a little clock on, and you know, they have altitude reading, a clock and some other things. So you actually can get time and you can figure out where the tide was historically. So that would be really cool to look at title. But I don't think, you know, the forties, that could be done with that earlier stuff, but for some of the later stuff. 60s, 70s, 80s for sure. Would be neat.
Yeah, a lot of applications. Yeah, any last question? Anybody online? No?
Thanks to the folks zooming in.
Yeah, thanks,
Great.
thank you very much, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is awesome. So Peter will be finishing up his fellowship over the next year, I think, and so we'll have more chances to talk with him and interact with him. You've already been working with a bunch of staff, so anybody who's interested, just let us know. Get in touch. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys.